Welcome back to the channel. I'm Bowen the Great, and I've played a lot of Lightyear Frontier, and while the game does a great job at walking you through things, there are a few items that I wish I could go back and know when I started out, which I wanted to share with all of you. And if you're new to the channel, then please consider subscribing because we do a lot of fun things from cozy guides to let's plays to even game reviews. Anyways, let's not waste any more time and get things kicked off. Now, after you've quite literally picked up the pieces of your mech, pick out a place to build your first little home. And don't worry, you can always move it later on if you find a more cozier location that you enjoy a little bit more. Lightyear Frontier does building right because while it doesn't force you to build a home, you get certain coziness perks when you not only build your home, but decorate it to a certain degree. The first perk you actually gain is called Keen Eye, which is extremely important to get, especially early game. Keen Eye gives you a chance to find additional resources upon harvest, which means that you'll have to grind less for materials because you'll just naturally get more. You may notice that with your starter tent, you only gain access to one coziness level perk, and not to spoil too much, but as you upgrade your tent to a proper home, you'll actually unlock more coziness levels, which means more perks. You'll get bigger and fancier homes as you continue unlocking new resources. Now, I won't spoil the next 3 coziness perks you actually unlock, so you'll have to keep playing to figure it out. Now, this sort of transitions perfectly into my next tip because you'll want to get your farm planted ASAP, which may seem a bit redundant given that this is a farming sim. With future updates, things could change, but as of right now, you're actually able to scale very quickly since you can naturally find seeds growing in the wild, and building farms is pretty cheap as well. Your first seeds will be polyberry seeds, and you'll want to each day, in between getting more resources and restoring areas, grab as many seeds as you can. You'll hopefully be able to get multiple farming plots rolling with polyberry seeds, which I super highly recommend building them close to water because given you can't build a well, you'll be making lots of trips back and forth to get your crops watered. Some of these seeds you'll want to put in your press machine, but the rest that you don't use for building or upgrades, I recommend tossing into storage container until you're able to build the merchant station. The merchant station unlocks the trader Lola who will buy and sell goods, so you can dump any excess of crops for usually a pretty big payday. Now, speaking of Lola, a super helpful tip for crops you get later on that are a bit further away is that once you find a single seed out in the wild, you're actually able to buy that seed from Lola, sometimes even for a discount. Now, I know it seems wasteful at first when you can just go gather some in the wild, but when you're trying to really scale like I mentioned before, buying seeds in bulk from her is a fantastic idea. Now, on top of that, there's also an economy system in the game, which means that sometimes she'll buy and sell items for a discount. Now, I highly recommend utilizing this when either buying that fancy new mech part or when selling your crops for a little extra cash. Now, feeding wildlife may be generally frowned upon on Earth, but in Lightyear Frontier it is highly incentivized because you're actually able to get a perk for a day for that specific area. This stacks with your Keen Eye boost, so if you need a specific type of resource, this is a great way to optimize that. Animals will also dig up resources for you when you give them fodder, but the real benefit though is from the perk. The other thing that makes feeding animals slightly annoying is that animals in different areas require different types of fodder, so you can't just make a bunch of basic fodder early game and expect to be able to use it later on in the other areas to help with grinding out resources. So realistically, you'll only use this if you aren't just normally gathering resources to progress in the game. Now, personally, I really hope that the devs do something to make animals a bit more useful because later in the game, it really isn't all that beneficial to feed animals unless you're just achievement hunting. Who knows, at some point in time, maybe the devs will add ranching into the game. Lightyear Frontier really doesn't spell out to you early on what tech unlocks what, but whenever you find a new resource, I highly recommend crafting at least one of each item that resource can produce. Same goes for equipment. When you unlock a new piece of equipment, make sure to craft one of them, place it down, and craft one of each item it can produce because you'll unlock random decorations and other important items used for upgrades. I do wish the devs would add a tech tree so that it would be a little bit more clear to new players as to what they need to unlock what. For example, to make clay, you have to first take stone, turn it into stone dust, then put it in the assembler. I did not realize this until I started just randomly trying things out. But in these crafting games, it's like the old saying goes, when in doubt, start crafting random things until you figure it out. That's definitely a saying, right? Moving on, you'll unlock a shed pretty early on, which looks pretty nifty, but also provides a huge bonus to equipment. All you need to do is make sure that you build your equipment underneath the shed, and if you did it correctly, it'll even tell you that there's a chance for duplicate items when crafting. It's a small % chance, but it is super helpful since there is a decent amount of grinding for resources required in the game. I also recommend having multiple sheds so you don't have to jam-pack equipment underneath only 1 or 2 sheds. Now, upgrading your mech is realistically the most important thing in the game. Now, I'm not talking about just aesthetic upgrades, even though that's pretty important as well. But I'm talking about upgrading your water tank size or resource damage to more quickly harvest items. It's something you can easily forget about and then all of a sudden realize that you're way lagging behind and have to do a lot of grinding to catch back up. You want to make sure you're paying attention to what you need next, so if your next upgrade calls for 50 polyberry, you may want to get a massive amount of polyberry planted so you can upgrade that sooner rather than later. Same with what I mentioned before, if you see a resource that you don't recognize, play around with some of the equipment and crafting to see if you just missed being able to craft a particular item. Now, moving items really is quite simple and can be done without much headache. All you need to do is recycle the item to which you get all your resources back, which makes redesigning your home or even moving your home across the entire land much easier and seamless. Now, it does kind of suck because moving across an entire area while over encumbered is kind of a pain in the ass. This is why I said at the very beginning to just plant your home down first to get the coziness bonuses, then you can always move it later on. This next tip sort of relates to keeping up with your upgrades like I mentioned previously, and might seem like something that's obvious, but as you go along, certain areas that you need to restore require certain mech upgrades. One of the things that I got really hung up on was that I needed upgrades that I didn't have access to yet, and I was beating my head against the wall to figure out what I needed. All I really needed to do was go to a different area. Cleared that area out, which gave me access to a new resource, which allowed me to upgrade my mech to take on that area. Moral of the story, if you think you're stuck in restoring areas, it's either one of two things. You jumped a little ahead and need to find the actual next area, or you just haven't crafted a resource to upgrade your mech yet. I mentioned this very briefly, but one of the most annoying things in the game is dealing with being over encumbered, which blocks your ability to jump or sprint, which makes your mech insanely slow. And with as large of a map as that we're playing in, walking around slowly takes quite some time. Now, to combat this, I highly recommend building lots of stores to deposit and organize neatly some of your heavier items like ores, wood, and stone. Things like seeds don't weigh anything, so can be carried with you at all times. You'll also unlock larger storage containers that can hold more weight, so I highly recommend using those once you unlock them. As you explore the planet, you'll come across alien ruins, and for the most part, there are one alien ruin per area. Now, you can fully explore these ruins and find artifacts, which once you collect all of them in each area, you'll unlock a new piece of alien decor. I highly recommend going ahead and knocking this out when you first discover them, because some of these are pretty well hidden, and finding them again is not always the easiest thing. And some of the artifacts as well are a huge pain to find because they are so tiny, and if you're struggling with this, I highly recommend going into your settings and turning off your music and turning up the general audio and SFX settings, because the artifacts will emit a certain sound when you are nearby. While I love the music in the game, it's super peaceful, it sometimes drowns out the sound of the artifact, so it's a little bit harder to find. And hopefully these little tips help you get started in the cozy farming sim Lightyear Frontier. If you have any additional tips that you would like to add, let's all help each other out and drop in the comments below. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.